died at the age of 29. In his diary, which has inspired millions, David Brainerd wrote, "Oh, how precious is time, and how it pains me to see it slide away, while I do so little to any good purpose. Oh, that God would make me more fruitful."
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
As always, we thank you for joining us on Crosstalk here on VCY America, as today we're answering the question, is tyranny knocking at the door? Former President Ronald Reagan said this: "If we lose freedom here, there is no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth." Ladies and gentlemen, this very freedom is under attack by some draconian orders coming from a variety of sources. And if you think I'm over-dramatizing this, just look what's happening across the nation. In Michigan, it's okay to buy weed, and I'm referring to marijuana, but it's a violation of the governor's orders to buy seed. Weed is okay, seed is not. You can't plant flowers for beauty. No, you cannot buy seed for raising vegetables in your garden to sustain your family's food supply. In many states, it's deemed essential to kill babies at the abortion center, but illegal or non-essential to stand outside with a sign saying you object. In many states, you can go to Walmart or you can go to the liquor store. You just can't go to church. As a matter of fact, as the IllinoisFamily.org pointed out, in one county in California, the health department issued an order which stated the following: for streaming church services, no singing or use of wind instruments, harmonicas, or other instruments that could spread COVID-19 through projected droplets shall be permitted unless the recording of the event is done at one's residence and involving only the members of the one's household or living unit because of the increased risk of transmission of COVID-19. Well, our guest today will be providing some analysis on these things, as well as the threat to religious freedom, and says it's time for churches to reopen. Joining us today, we welcome constitutional attorney Matt Staver. He is the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, Jim.
Matt, can you bring us some understanding to this? I mean, you heard what I've stated here in my intro.
Yeah, you weren't talking about America, were you? You're talking about some fictional novel someplace?
Yeah, and that's the bizarre nature of this, is that this is happening right now in our in our nation. And so help us understand what's going on as it relates to our local church ministry and so forth.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Let's start with Daniel. Daniel, was told, it's only 30 days, Daniel. Don't worry about it. Just modify the way that you worship for 30 days and everything will be okay. Well, Daniel said, no, I open up the window, I look toward Jerusalem, and I pray. And I've done that every day, and I do it at certain times of the day, and I'm going to continue to do it. He put his life on the line. And, we were told, well, it's only 2 weeks, and so many were saying, okay, we can handle 2 weeks, so let's just flip everything from in-person to online. Everyone wanted to, do what they could to help stop the spread of the coronavirus. Well, 2 weeks has turned into, 5, 6 weeks? And for some places around the country, like Wisconsin, it goes into toward the end of May.
After Memorial Day.
After Memorial Day. And in Virginia, it's June 10. June 10. So we're talking about May and June, the rest of April, May and June. And who knows? They keep moving the goalposts. It's like you get close to the goal line, and the referee keeps moving the goalposts. So you never know where that end is in sight. And now it's gotten so bizarre. We have what you just mentioned, that governments are telling churches how they can worship, what kind of, particularly they're naming the kinds of instruments you can or cannot use. They're telling you that how you have to worship. You have to worship online. Well, that doesn't work for everyone who doesn't have Internet. Services that can't be done online, those that have Internet, but they can't have enough bandwidth to get an online service. And then they started off saying, well, you can only have 250. Then they dropped it down to 100. Frankly, if they could say 250, if your church seats 500 and they say 250, anything under the maximum that fits in that building for zoning purposes, if the church can dictate any number, then any number is okay. So they started off with 250, then 100, then 50, then 10. In parts of New Mexico, it's 5 people in the church. Doesn't matter how big the service is. You could have, like what we have in Virginia, we're representing a pastor, 293-seat sanctuary. And he had 16 people in that sanctuary spread out far and wide. These people don't have access to the Internet. The church is their only family. Some of these are recovering drug addicts or prostitutes that have come out of prostitution. That church is their family. They depend upon the church for everyday support and life needs. 16 people in a roughly 300-seat sanctuary. But because it was 6 people over the governor's magic number of 10, he now faces a year in jail and $2,500 fine. I mean, it's unbelievable, and this is not okay. This is something where we're seeing the government tell churches whether you can exist or not, and then even when they've got their boot on your throat telling you how you have to worship, and you have to worship according to my specifications, not how your conscience and the Scriptures dictate.
Matt, I know we've got much to talk about, but this really needs to be a must point of discussion because you come from both a constitutional perspective as well as a biblical perspective. And I want to share just a few verses of Scripture and have you comment on this. For instance, Romans 13:1 says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there's no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil." The passage also says, "He's a minister of God to thee for good." Then 1 Peter 2:13 says, "Submit ourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether be to the king as supreme or unto governors, unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well." Many will look at these verses, Matt, and say it is the Christian's responsibility to obey, even if one doesn't agree. And in light of where things are today and these principles from Scripture, could you bring these together for us?
Yeah, and if you look at both the Romans and Peter passages, what does it say that government is set up to do? It is set up to keep the civil order, right? And it is set up to do 2 things. 1, to punish the evildoer and to protect the good, right? Mm-hmm. It's not to take the role of God and to dictate how you're supposed to worship. Jesus says, "Render to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar, and to God the things that belong to God." There's 2 different jurisdictions. There is the state, and certainly in that context it was pay taxes. You may not like your taxes, but the government uses those taxes to do what Romans 13 and Peter say, to punish the evildoer, to punish the criminals, to have that law and order, and to protect the good. But when it ultimately tries to crush the church, that is not a jurisdiction of the state. That is not punishing the evil and protecting the good. That is a direct crossing of that line as Jesus drew that line. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. The Scriptures say in Hebrews, "Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the custom of some." And now it is even more important, it says in Hebrews, to come together. The word church, ekklesia, means assembly. The Greek word synagogue, where we get the word synagogue today, it comes from Greek. It also means an assembly of people, Jews assembling together, Christians assembling together. That is a command. That is the essence and essential nature of the church, is a group of believers assembling together. Now, I know it's more than a building. Certainly it is. But the government doesn't have the right to tell you you can't worship. Doesn't have the right to say you can only have 10 people in your worship. Doesn't have the right to say that you can only have percussion instruments or not wind instruments. And doesn't have all of that authority that is an inalienable right to worship God according to the dictates of our conscience. And by the way, the Constitution doesn't give them that authority. It also draws the line. That line is, government must not establish a religion. It sure is if it's telling you you can't practice your religion in the way that the Scriptures and your conscience dictate. and can't interfere with the free exercise of religion. It sure is if it's telling you how to worship and whether your church can even operate, but at the same time saying that a liquor store, an abortion clinic, Home Depot can operate, all of which don't have the same constitutional protection of churches. So we have to look at the whole Scripture. And in fact, if you look at Romans 13, just one more point in that, Romans 13 was the favorite passage of the Protestant churches in Nazi Germany, also some of the Catholic churches as well, by their clergy, I should say. There was only a small group of confessing churches or confessing individuals, as they were called, that pushed against the Nazi regime. The Romans 13 passage was preached in a big church in Germany with the pastor speaking about that same pastor, you need to obey the government, and all of the Nazi leaders, the high-ranking leaders, were in attendance, and they were so pleased. And when you go back and you look at why did the church not speak up, many people who lived through that time said it was because people misapplied Romans 13, that they had to be subjected to this horror of the state. No, the state abandoned its role that God set up when it begins to punish the good and not the evil. And that's what's happening when it ultimately puts its foot on the neck, its boot on the neck of churches and our duty to worship God according to the dictates of our conscience.
Matt Staver with us today from Liberty Counsel. Matt, do you believe that in not all cases, but there are many cases in which the states have crossed the line from protecting against a disease to gone from that to tyranny itself?
Yeah, for example, look in Kentucky. We filed suit there, and we're litigating there now. And in that particular case, you have a pastor who, on Easter Sunday, he wanted to have some members in the church, but very far spaced out, has 700 people, 700 seat sanctuary, but a very small number, far spaced out. And he also was doing the parking lot service. Governor Beshear sent state troopers to put a notice of quarantine on everyone who was sitting in those of cars, or every car that was in that parking lot, a small number of cars, because they were intimidated. Some drove off. These are people who could have driven down to the Home Depot, turned on the radio, and listened to their pastor if he was able to preach through the radio or some other communication device. They could have all gone down there, no problem. Windows open, windows closed, doesn't really matter. 6 feet apart, not 6 feet, it doesn't matter. You could fill the Home Depot parking lot, listen to your pastor on the radio, no problem. But because they were parked in that church and they were listening to the pastor preach through the loudspeaker system, they got a notice of quarantine for 14 days. Yes, they have really crossed the line and done some very bad unconstitutional things. Just Saturday night, a federal court in Kansas stopped the governor's order that limits church attendance to 10. The church says it's going to take health precautions, and it gave a whole list of things that it would do. But the court says there is no government authority under the Constitution to dictate the size of a church, especially when you have liquor stores and commercial complexes with no limitation on the number of people they serve.
Matt Staver is with us here today from Liberty Counsel, and we're asking the question today, is tyranny knocking at the door? And the answer indeed is yes, it is. And when we see some of the situations that are cropping up across this nation, not only if you can worship, but how and what instruments you can use in that regard. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to delve further into this, including taking a look at also the irreparable harm to the economy itself. Is this something that people will die from due to these draconian orders? What about the role of sheriff in the county, as we see sheriffs that are standing up saying, it is my constitutional duty in order to defend the U.S. Constitution and our state constitution? We'll be delving more into those issues after the break. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation researcher with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, any new dinosaur extinction theories?
Of course, Chris, there's always a new theory. Here's a new one. We all know that methane gas can be deadly at high concentrations. Methane gas is found in gases exuding from deep inside the Earth, and it's proposed that a huge methane belch of gas came up from the Earth's mantle, spread out over the land, and killed off all the dinosaurs. Well, that's convenient. That's the kind of theory you can't prove one way or the other. But here's something else to think about. The dead dinosaurs are all found in water-deposited strata. They're not just laying on the surface of the ground having been poisoned by methane gas. They were buried by water. I think it's the Great Flood of Noah's day. That flood may have included a lot of methane, but it was primarily a water flood. That's the evidence we have. It all goes back to Genesis.
Thank you, Dr. John. This is Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Constitutional attorney Matt Staver with us here today on the broadcast as we're taking a look as to really the state of the nation and this aspect of tyranny that is coming down through the auspices of governors and even in our state here, as last week the governor issued this order keeping the state closed until after Memorial Day. Even though his emergency powers are running out, Matt, he is using the guise of an appointed position that he made to the Department of Health. The Senate has even confirmed this person, and yet he is passing the buck to this person saying, well, now they are issuing an order to keep the state closed down.
Yeah, they're trying to get around. It's like the passing a football across, back and forth between people trying to run to the goal. And so when his time runs out, he's going to pass it to somebody else who's under him, who's been appointed, who reports to him. And then apparently when that person's time runs out, they're going to pass it back to the governor. So this kind of tyranny, they just want to continue on and on. You know, in Wisconsin, this plan, and I put that in quotes, to lift this safer-at-home order is they want to have more testing. They want to have more testing. They want to have more tracking. They want to have a bunch of other things before they'll lift these safer-at-home orders. But you know what? People around the country are getting fed up with these things. And even Facebook now, as recently as this morning, Mark Zuckerberg said that Facebook is censoring these reopen the different state protests that have been happening, and they've been on Facebook where people have, in Michigan there were thousands and thousands gathered in their cars at the Michigan Capitol. In Colorado yesterday, thousands jammed the street in the Capitol. And in many states around the country, like Tuesday, Wednesday, there's lots of different states. Wednesday is the District of Columbia. Just having people gather in their state capitol to push back. And now Facebook, we thought that this only happened in China, where they would stop people who were trying to get out the word about the repression. But now Facebook is censoring people here. That puts up these gatherings of, we're talking about even people in their cars that want to go to the state capitol.
And that's what's happening in many of these cases. We saw it even in Brookfield, Wisconsin this past Saturday, where people showed up for such a protest and people going by in their vehicles. We understand this Friday, which was the day Wisconsin was to open up, and the governor extended it yet another month, that there's going to be a major peaceful protest in Madison, Wisconsin. And I understand that's how they are billed to be, peaceful protest in this regard. But some feel that quandary, though, Matt. We talked about what Romans said in 1 Peter, and people ask, am I wrong if I'm a believer in Christ to attend some of these things?
Well, let's look at the Declaration of Independence. If Romans applies in that respect, where you always obey the government, no matter whether the government becomes evil itself. And I heard a great message about this. This was during an election cycle of 2008. When the government or when a particular group of people adopt evil and carry out evil, rather than punishing the evildoer and protecting the good, then it's crossed the line of that God-ordained authority. Obviously, we want to respect and we want to be peaceful. But let's look back at, and no one wants to be uncivilized or unpeaceful. You got to do things in a peaceful way. On the other hand, protesting is a peaceful way to do that. And if you go back and look at the Declaration of Independence, you have to ask yourself the question, was the American Revolution wrong? Do you really believe the words of the Declaration of Independence, that we are created by God with unalienable rights? God gives us the rights, not government. And the government's duty is to protect those pre-existing rights, and that whenever government begins a pattern, not just an occasional misstep, but a pattern of abusing those rights, it says it is our right, it is our duty to throw off such government and to provide new safeguards for our future security. And then they give a list of why they did what they did. That is the birth certificate of the American Revolution, of the United States of America.
Would you tell us about the role of a sheriff? I know there are various sheriffs around the country who are not complying, saying we will not comply with the orders of a governor. We just had a sheriff now in Wisconsin. Another one looks like he's going to join in as well, saying, listen, I took a constitutional oath to uphold the Constitution, and we're not going to enforce the governor's orders. What about the role of the sheriff?
Well, I think he's right. Each person, sheriff, governor, mayor, they all take an independent oath to defend their state and United States constitutions. And that doesn't get abdicated to somebody above them who is not protecting. For example, in New Jersey, the New Jersey governor was asked how he squared his restriction on churches with the Constitution. You know what his answer was? I never thought about it. Mm-hmm. It's above his pay grade, he says. No, he swore an oath to the Constitution. And when he does something unconstitutional like that, and you've got a sheriff below him, that sheriff has an independent obligation also to look at whether or not that order coming from above is unconstitutional. And these orders, in many of these cases, go beyond the Constitution. Like I said, the government didn't even think about the Constitution. So I applaud those sheriffs that say, look, I'm not going to enforce this. You have the same situation in Kansas before the court stopped the governor. The Kansas Democrat governor wanted to have this very strong restriction on churches and others. The Attorney General, who's a Republican, issued an opinion and said, no, that's unconstitutional. Well, finally, the federal court sided with that Attorney General and against the governor. So, you also have individual deputies or police officers under the sheriff or the chief of police. Now, those individuals, they also swear an oath, but, if they have a situation where their sheriff or chief of police tells them, you need to go arrest these people because they're doing a parking lot service, for example, I would, if I was one of those individuals, say, I can't do it. That violates my conscience. It's unconstitutional, and get somebody else to do it, but I cannot do it. And if that person says, well, if you don't, you're fired. Well, so what? I'm fired. Go ahead and fire me then. I will not do it. I would hope that there are more people that have that kind of strong integrity, that irrespective of whether their job's on the line, they're not going to cross the line and just shred the Constitution.
Many are also concerned, Matt, by the irreparable harm to our economy, and that the damage we're doing to our economy is going to be costing many lives as a result of that as well.
Yeah, there's already reports of even people who have committed suicide, business owners, that just their whole thing went down the tube. It's very sad. But you have people who have lost their jobs, businesses who have gone under, and they may not ever be able to come back again. As a result of that, it causes a lot of stress within those families. And if you know, whenever you deal with marital or family situations, what's the number one stress factor that ultimately causes friction in the home sometimes? And that is finances, or the lack of finances. And that's what people are experiencing now. They don't know whether their job is safe. Many of them have lost their jobs. They don't know where the next dollar's coming from, where the next meal's coming from. What we do know is, as a result, that increases mental stress. And what we also know is it increases depression, anxiety, and a lot of factors are happening around the country and the United States. What's it doing? Increased domestic violence. You talk to law enforcement officers. I've talked to them all over. I talked to people who have talked to them, and they say they're getting inundated with domestic violence calls. Mm-hmm. Increase of domestic violence, increase of child abuse because the children are at home. The mother oftentimes has even a higher stress level because she's trying to figure out how to do this online program when the public school system wasn't created for online. So then you have increased child abuse. You have increased viewing of pornography by incredible percentages. In India, it raised 95%. I think the numbers are maybe even higher now. 95% within a short period of time. what that does is when the kids are home, when other people are around, you start immersing yourself in pornography, child sexual molestation. The increase of child sex online has skyrocketed of demand in this country and other countries where it is being broadcast online from the Philippines and other places around the world. That has skyrocketed. Increased alcohol consumption, increased suicide. All of these things, those are irreparable, Jim. For some of these people, those injuries cannot be reversed because some of them have actually gone to the ultimate unfortunate point of suicide, or a child has been, beaten and the skull has been broken, or they've been sexually molested. Those are very serious and severe injuries. And this kind of lockdown, then locking down the church, the place of refuge, the lighthouse, compounds the problem because the church is not able to be out there. So when we say, well, you can just flip everything online, well, look, there's a whole bunch of people out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can reach more people online. I get it that there's a lot of people watching online. But from a pastor's heart, there's a lot of people out there, I call them the forgotten people, that you cannot help online. They need a place of assembly. Yes, do what you have to protect health and welfare, but don't close the doors of the church.
Matt Staver with us here today on from Liberty Counsel. And folks, we're going to be talking about an initiative that they're launching here momentarily. But before I do that, Matt, we had come across a rather troubling story. We were talking about these protests and things going on, but WND.com had the story late last week of an officer who was injured on duty because somebody who was involved in the protest lost his cool. He threw an object. The officer got hurt. And what we have is the ruling from the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals saying that the policeman can sue the organizer because he should have known something like that was possible, according to a federal appeals court. We understand it's being appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's kind of a troubling decision, though, isn't it?
Very troubling. Obviously, we don't want anybody to take things into their own hands and cause violence. I mean, these are peaceful demonstrations, peaceful protests. Some of them are in your car, some of them are not, depending upon where you're on the country. But nobody should be, no matter whether that police officer is enforcing or not enforcing what he or she should be. These are officers of the law, and we need to respect them. But this decision is very troubling because nobody who organizes something like that, and certainly in that case, that person wasn't intending anybody to take matters in their own hands or hurt a police officer. There is no causal relationship. That would be a significant infringement on the First Amendment right to free speech and assemble.
There is also a situation going on where some states are actually pulling over out-of-state motorists, requiring them to, sign some kind of form pledging that they're going to incarcerate themselves or isolate themselves for some 14 days. Is that constitutional?
No, that's not constitutional. We have a right to travel. I mean, there's all kinds of constitutional rights that are being trampled upon. But we have a right to travel, and those are constitutional rights. We have the right to freedom of religion, free exercise of religion, a right that the government won't establish a religion, a right to peacefully assemble and free speech, to petition our government. All of these different rights are there. They don't go away. They don't just simply have a pause button. There's no pause button on the Constitution. It says in the time of emergency, all these are suspended. No, that's not there at all.
We're going to take a quick break here on Crosstalk, and when we come back, we have one more topic here, and that is an initiative that is being launched by Liberty Counsel called Reopen Church Sunday. What exactly is that? Matt will be explaining that here momentarily, and then we'll be opening phone lines as well for you to call in and ask questions or have a brief comment here pertaining to our topic of discussion. So we'll be back in just 1 minute. This is Crosstalk coming your way from VCY America. Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. Their website is lc.org. That is letter L, letter C.org for Liberty Counsel. Back in a minute. This is Crosstalk.
Here's a clip from A Distant Thunder.
part of the Thief in the Night series.
Let me see your ID, please. Your right hand, please. That trick, young woman, is used in here 50 times a day. Now, if you want your child cared for, you must have your ID.
Please, you've got to help me. I can't take the mark.
The Thief in the Night 4-part prophecy DVD set, available through Crosstalk, as our way of saying thank you for your donation of $25 or more. Only need one DVD of A Thief in the Night? It's available for a donation of just $10. Call VCY America 1-800-729-9829, 1-800-729-9829, or online at vcyamerica.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Constitutional attorney Matt Staver is with us today from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, you at Liberty Counsel have initiated what you're calling Reopen Church Sunday. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's Reopen Church Sunday, and we have a landing page called reopenchurch.org, reopenchurch.org. You can also go to lc.org, and it's right there on the scrolling picture at the top. But it is to encourage churches to, some are open, and they're doing small numbers, but it may depend upon different states, but basically to reopen the church on Sunday. Now, what we're suggesting is to take
and this is the first Sunday of May, is that correct?
This is the first Sunday of May, and this is the Sunday. This is the week beginning for the National Day of Prayer. The National Day of Prayer is typically May. This year would be May 7, and that's on a Thursday. And the activity in Washington, D.C. usually happens beginning that Sunday. So this is the beginning of that week. The other thing is that the President issued his 3-phase plan, and he's encouraging states to systematically begin the process of reopening. Phase 1 begins on May the 1st, which is a Friday, begins May the 1st, and churches are in that Phase 1 plan to begin that process of reopening. So we're suggesting that churches reopen, and here's some of the things that we suggested, and of course you can do whatever combination, but we're suggesting a combination of these 3 options. In-church service. Reduce the size of the sanctuary so you maintain, sanitizing the church, and you also maintain, sufficient social distancing. So that would be a reduced size. For the rest of those individuals that either cannot get in or do not want to go inside, a parking lot service that can go on at the same time. And for those that are older or have health predispositions and don't want to go to the parking lot service, an online service. So do all 3 of them, but begin the process of opening the churches around the country. Reopen Church Sunday is what we're calling it, May the 3rd. It is a Sunday from this coming Sunday, and it is the beginning of that week, which culminates in the week of prayer.
Folks, again, you can find more information at lc.org. You'll see the icon there for Reopen Church, or lc.org/reopenchurch, and that'll take you right there as well. And Matt, there are some, though, that some states are saying, no, that you cannot gather more than 10.
I think all those are unconstitutional, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're unconstitutional. The government has no authority to tell you that you can only have 10, especially when they say to the liquor stores, you can pack the parking lot, you can pack the store, you can go to Home Depot, Walmart, Kmart, whatever else you can go to, jam the parking lots, jam the stores, and that's essential. And yet they don't have a constitutional right to exist. There's no place in the Constitution where you have a right to open a Walmart or to have a Walmart or to go to a Walmart. But you do have a constitutional right for churches. It's specifically in the First Amendment. So I would encourage people, don't be hazardous. Obviously, we have to begin the process. We're not saying that you just go from 0 to 100 in, 1 second. But look at that as a target date, and Reopen Church Sundays, May the 3rd. You can do a combination of those 3. a limited in-person service with appropriate social distancing, sanitization, and other things, a combination of parking lot services for those that can't get in or don't want to go in, and also online services. Move from the only online service. And I think this should be a national movement around the country.
Our phone number to Crosstalk is 800-733-9829. That's 1-800-733-9829. If you have a brief question, or I should say a brief comment or a question for our guest here today, pick up your phone, give us a call. I see the lines have jammed up immediately here today on Crosstalk, giving you opportunity. We don't have time for long discourses. If you have a brief comment or a question that you can ask Matt, we'll take that here today on the program, Crosstalk. But as soon as you hear somebody hang up, that's your opportunity to call. Again, the number is 800-733-9829. A reminder, the website is lc.org/reopen church. We're going to begin in Michigan. And Gene, thanks for calling Crosstalk. You're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. You know, I'm an older man. I'm 77, and I'm a Christian, and, you know, I don't have internet or anything. I'll tell you, this is rough, you know. I read the Bible, and, boy, thank God for VCY. But what I want to say, why can't the president give an executive order when Barack Obama was in? He executive ordered this, he did that, and I paid attention. Why can't he executive and say, well, the people that want to assemble in the church can do so, but keep the distance, you know, the guidelines that they have.
Okay, Jane, we got your question?
Well, he can't force the states. That's where you have some federalism, in other words, states' rights.
10th Amendment.
So the only thing he could do is, you know, withhold certain federal funding from the emergency funding. But he couldn't force them. And so you have the individual state rights. But what he did was this Phase 3 plan. And Phase 1 begins May 1. And that's where he's encouraging, including churches, to begin the process of reopening. He actually has recently been tweeting as well, liberate Virginia, liberate Michigan.
Yeah.
And liberate some of these other states as well. So he is encouraging this effort to push back and reopen the states.
Thank you, Gene. We're going next to William in East Troy, Wisconsin. You're on the air.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. Mr. Staver, thank you for putting out your Know Your Rights in the State of Emergency PDF. I've printed a bunch off and handed them out to some pastors and Christian friends and family members of mine. But I just wanted to know, do you think it's a wise decision for us as citizens to call up our local sheriff's departments and ask them if they're going to uphold the Constitution, like the sheriff in Racine?
Well, yeah, sure. I think you know, if you don't have, first of all, I think the first line would be your governor. But if your governor is so far off the beaten path that the governor is not going to listen, begin with the sheriffs because they're the ones who are going to enforce it. And if you have a reasonable attorney general, like, for example, in Kansas, you had, and in Kentucky. Kansas and Kentucky have the same thing. You have these Democrat governors who are enforcing these draconian orders, restrictions. Then you have a Republican attorney general in both states that are pushing back. So different ways to go about the same thing.
Thank you, William. Joseph, you're next. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to offer a quick idea, example, and quote. The idea is principle versus pragmatism. The principle would be biblical, and it would say it works, therefore it is right for the government to advise the citizen, advise. Versus pragmatism is more of a humanist idea, and it would say it works, therefore it is right for the government to mandate the citizen. Now, examples would be helmet laws, seatbelt laws, and the closing quote would be from Ronald Reagan, and it would say, government's rightful purpose is to protect us from each other. The government errs when they presume to protect us from ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think that, you know, the government advice is fine, and that's why, you know, a lot of churches are going to follow the social distancing because they want to do that. They want to do what's best for their community and their people. But the government then telling churches, particularly churches, I'm talking about churches in this case because we've got a First Amendment right to deal with, and for them to say that you must do this and you must do that and you must only have 10 or you must only have 5 or you must only have percussion instruments, that goes far beyond anything that the government has the authority to do.
Thank you, Joseph. Mike in Salisbury, Maryland, you're on the air.
Yes, my name is Mike, and listen, I wanted to share something with you. I called our local funeral director about funerals, and he was informing me now that you cannot have a funeral of more than 10 people.
Right.
Yeah. No, I know it. That's happened. That's been happening for a couple of weeks. Unbelievable. Yeah, where people can't even attend their funerals.
Yeah. It's sad because you have a funeral and you want people to come, and not only that, if you have the coronavirus, they will put you in the ground without embalming.
Well, and that's another whole issue about the coronavirus. I mean, there's this. This is another topic for another day. But we know somebody who, a man who drowned. A friend who knows a man who drowned. He drowned, so that was his cause of death. But he had the coronavirus. They didn't list drowning as a cause of death on the death certificate. They listed COVID-19.
The death numbers are just greatly escalated. We saw that happen also in New York, where we had, some 3,000 added to the death count who had never been tested for COVID-19, were presumed to have it. Thank you, Mike, for the call. Daniel is next in Owen, Wisconsin. You're on the air.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
My question, if the gentleman would comment, the governor's has a 60-day limitation on his emergency orders, which the current one, number 72, should expire the 12th of May, and how that is going to affect the DHS secretary's extension of the current order, the Safer at Home order.
Well, that's a good question. That was what Jim was actually pointing out earlier, that there looks like there may be an internal challenge in the state to that, because you can't just carry the football, and when somebody gets ready to tackle you because you've run out of the football field, just lateral it to somebody else and they keep on going. You can't just come to the end and then lateral it to somebody who is your subordinate, who's also appointed by the legislature. You can't just lateral it, and then the executive order, the state of emergency, just continues to go on ad infinitum. So I think that'll be challenged.
And Daniel, if you have opportunity tonight at 7 o'clock, we're on WVCY television. We're going to be interviewing a state senator on this very issue. We do stream our program as well as it's live in southeast Wisconsin, but it's streamed through our VCY America app, as well as streamed through VCYAmerica.tv, 7 o'clock this evening. Thanks for the call. Deanna in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, you're on the air.
Hi, my name is Deanna. I work as a nurse in the ICU here in Sioux Falls, and I can tell you, for one, I am very excited for churches to open again. Obviously, we all agree coronavirus is real, and just dealing with death in itself, I really feel like I need my church family, and I need to be able to be with my church family if I'm going to go through those things. But the one thing I wanted to say, my pastor's all about doing what's reasonable and doing what we can. What we do at the hospital is we give a temperature screening to everybody that comes to work that day. So we just take a temp probe right over their forehead and make sure they don't have a fever. And if pastors are looking for simple, small things that we could do to make sure people are healthy, there's really no reason that you can't do something like that as a screening, and then we're taking care of our elder saints and showing them that we do love them.
No, that's a good point, and there's a lot of different ways that people can be creative about how do we reopen, and we fellowship, but we take reasonable steps to protect the health and welfare of people, and of course, encourage those people who may be susceptible within that susceptible category, and we've all heard about those categories, to wait a little. Maybe May 3 is not the right day for you to come, but maybe you can go in the car and do because maybe you haven't been able to even do that. So lots of different ways, and your point is very well taken. Thank you for serving at this time. I know that there's so many like you around the country, and I just want to say thanks to you.
Yes, well, thank you for the Lord for allowing me to serve and giving me the skills.
Thank you, Deanna. Yep. And I'll tell you what, we're up against a break, so we'll take more of your calls following the break. Matt Staver with us from Liberty Counsel, lc.org/reopenchurch, lc.org/reopenchurch, and you'll find the details there. Make sure you read through the details and see how they are looking at this incrementally. Back in a minute, you're listening to Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Week in Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewradio.com. The other night in my research, I stumbled on a 2014 article in the Washington Post as well as at National Post. Headline: Bill Gates funds birth control microchip that lasts 16 years inside the body and can be turned on or off with remote control. Guess who's helping him develop it? None other than MIT. The same group, an MIT company is helping him do this. That's MIT, who's also, according to numerous reports, helping him develop a special kind of dye that can be put onto the skin to see if you've gotten your vaccine. But what's very troubling about the microchip birth control, it is controlled wirelessly. The question is, who will turn it on? Who will turn it off? What will qualify one to be able to procreate? My friends, this is nothing more than eugenics updated with today's technology.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Phone lines are absolutely packed. We're going right back to them. Let's go to Phil is next. Go ahead, Phil. You're on the air.
Hi. I just wanted to make a quick comment. You know, Steve Hilton had a good show on last night, and I think people need to look at that because even the president needs to look at the science that this guy was following for a while. And since the start of this thing, he says the numbers are actually where he was when he was watching this, and that the numbers are over-exaggerated in some cases.
Yeah, they keep
the other thing is
downsizing
that our governor, I'll tell you what, if people don't get out and vote, we're going to face this again in the future, and it's going to be even stronger because they knew they got away with it this time.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, and elections have consequences. We've heard that mantra over and over. Elections have consequences, and what happens this November is going to have huge ramifications. Thank you, Phil. Joshua's calling from Pennsylvania. You're on the air, Joshua.
Hi. Just a quick question. Pennsylvania recently mandated that masks are to be worn in essential businesses and for the business employees to wear them. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with it becoming a law. Is there anything constitutionally that we can do with this? Because I just feel like we're, pardon lack of better words, it's like the Holocaust. You know, it started with a star. You're mandated to wear a star. I feel like the government's getting too big for its britches. It's good to have recommendations. It's a whole other thing to make it a law, and I'll take my comments off here. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of these things could be challenged. It's just having the bandwidth to challenge them. I mean, we could have hundreds and literally probably thousands of cases that we have right now. It's just having the bandwidth to do it. You know, it's one thing to wear it's one thing to wear a proper mask and use it in the proper way, but having an improper mask or you wearing a proper mask with the improper handling of it, they don't help at all. So, you know, it's maddening that they mandate these masks when they don't tell you how to use them and what kind of the kind of mask that actually will work. They don't want you to use. They want you to go out and make your own.
Brad in West Dallas, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Hey, Brother Jim, I heard something this morning that I wanted to bring up because I don't know if everybody heard it or everybody else might have heard it or not, but it's this. There's an aspect of the CARE Act that sends money to hospitals based on the amount of COVID-19 deaths they have.
That's true. It gives 20% increase in Medicare for any COVID-19. Now, the original intent of that was they thought hospitals would be overwhelmed and they needed some additional funding. The problem, however, is that is ripe also for Medicare fraud, because with or without a test, you can say somebody has COVID, so they have a flu symptom. You could give them a COVID diagnosis, and if they're under Medicare, you get a 20% increase in payment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Matter of fact, last Thursday's Crosstalk, we had Dr. Jane Orient on, and she brought up this very aspect from the Association of Physicians and Surgeons, AAPS, online. Let's see. Steve is next in Phoenix, Arizona. You're on the air, Steve.
Yes, thank you. Recently, within the last 2 weeks, a minister in California who's also an attorney, before he held service, he sent a notice to the local sheriff or police chief stating that he would invoke 42 U.S.C. 1983 if the police tried to shut him down. Cops came by. They were going to shut him down. He says, I think you better call your chief. They called the chief. They got in their car. drove away and went after other churches, left him alone because of the 42 U.S.C. 93. Thank you.
1983. That's just a general statute that actually applies to protecting civil rights. The civil rights have to come from either a statute or a constitution. So all of our cases are 42 U.S.C. 1983. We had a situation in Florida where somebody in Florida, the governor says that attendance at services, religious services, events are essential, and the police officer tried to stop these people out in front of an abortion clinic. They had the executive order. They showed it to the police officers, and the police officers ultimately said, okay, and left them alone. Yeah.
Let's go to Bainbridge, Ohio. Blanche, you're on the air.
Yes, that their tyranny in government. There's a scripture in the Bible that says when it's to go against God, you'd rather obey God rather than men. And we have tyranny in our government right now, and we need to put a stop to it. We need to pray, fast, and believe and stop this right now and dead in its tracks, because God is the boss. He has got the power of heaven and earth. And we need to put a stop to it right now. And every Christian out there needs to stand up and say, we will not be defeated.
Okay, thank you, Blanche, for your comments there. And Matt, Blanche did bring up one issue there, and that is the matter of prayer, which is so critical for such a time as this.
No question about it. You know, if you go look at the plagues that came on Egypt, and especially Passover, God protected his people when they all claimed the blood of the Lamb. They gathered in a house for that last plague, and it was the blood of the Lamb. Well, we have the blood of Jesus.
Amen.
And we need to pray to the Lord for protection for ourselves, for our family, for our country, for an end of this virus, and for freedom to return again, for the church to really be the church that Jesus Christ wants, because he said the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. And so we need to pray, because there is power in prayer. It can move mountains, no question. Jesus says, even if you had faith as small as this mustard seed, you can move mountains. And so I encourage everyone to pray. We're coming toward that time of the National Day of Prayer, which is May 7. And so that's why we're looking at May 3, the Reopen Church Sunday, May the 3rd. It's coming up Sunday after this coming one, May the 3rd. Reopen Church Sunday.
Let's squeeze one last call in from Salina, Kansas. Steve, you're on the air.
You're right about prayer. God doesn't give the spirit of fear, but of love, strength, and a sound mind. And the only virus that's really affecting us is the virus of tyranny, and that's what's gotten to the government. I mean, you can be a Christian, but there's no reason to be a doormat. And we can do this peacefully. But you know what? This is our true test of the country. Are we going to let those people take us over, or are we going to take back our country? We have to make a decision what we're going to do. And you did talk about fraud in Medicare. This is the biggest fraud that I've seen in my life from a political standpoint and a media standpoint.
It tells you what, Steve, we're down to 30 seconds. Matt, I want you to close out. What do you want to leave with the listeners?
Well, I would encourage people to go to their website, lc.org. It's also reopenchurch.org. And talk to your pastor, talk to people in your congregation, and pray about reopening your church in whatever form or fashion on May the 3rd. That's Sunday from this coming, reopenchurch.org.
Matt Staver with us today, and Matt, as always, thank you so much for being here and to help inform our listeners.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel, again, lc.org or reopenchurch.org. Folks, thanks for joining us here today, and indeed, let's keep this nation in prayer in such a time as this. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from CrosstalkAmerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.